March 3, 1943. The Bismarck Sea lies still under a gray dawn, the kind of morning sailors call lucky. 8 Japanese transports and 8 destroyers move in tight formation, cutting white lines across the calm water like brushstrokes on blue canvas. On the bridge of the flagship Shirayuki, Rear Admiral Masatomi Kimura lifts his German-made binoculars, studying the horizon with the practiced eye of a man who has sailed these waters for decades. He sees nothing but empty ocean and possibility. For over a year, Japanese convoys have sailed this same route unchallenged. The Bismarck Sea, named after the German chancellor by colonial administrators decades ago, has become a Japanese lake, a highway of supply that feeds the empire's expansion across the Southwest Pacific. Kimura's officers share his confidence. They joke about American incompetence, about bombers that drop their loads from such heights they might as well be throwing stones at the moon. Below decks, 6,900 soldiers of the 51st Division rest among crates of rice, ammunition, and medical supplies. They're headed for Leh on the New Guinea coast, where Japanese forces desperately need reinforcement. Some write letters home, others sleep, lulled by the steady thrum of engines. A few play cards, betting cigarettes on games that will never finish. They whisper that by sunset they'll be on solid ground again, ready to push the Americans back into the sea. But 200 miles south, on improvised airstrips carved from New Guinea jungle, American bombers are already warming their engines. These are B-25 Mitchells, medium bombers that the Japanese think they understand. What they cannot imagine, what no doctrine has prepared them for, is that these aircraft are no longer bombers in any conventional sense. In Australian workshops over the past months, mechanics led by an innovative pilot named Paul "Pappy" Gunn have performed radical surgery on these planes. They've ripped out bombardier compartments and navigator seats. In their place, they've welded batteries of 50 caliber machine guns, 8 in the nose, 4 in blisters on the sides. Some carry as many as 14 forward-firing guns. The result is something that has never existed before, a strafer-bomber hybrid designed to attack at wave height, to kill ships not with bombs dropped from above, but with concentrated firepower delivered horizontally. It's an aircraft built for a kind of warfare that hasn't been written into any manual, Japanese or American. For the men aboard Kimura's convoy, that new reality is 3 hours away. They sail on, confident in their umbrella of steel, hundreds of 25mm anti-aircraft guns and 5-inch dual-purpose mounts that can throw up a curtain of fire no aircraft can penetrate. They've trained for attacks from above. They've drilled until their movements are automatic. Load, aim, fire. Create overlapping fields of fire that force bombers to stay high, where their accuracy suffers. What they haven't trained for is death arriving at eye level, skimming the waves at 280 miles per hour. Admiral Kimura lowers his binoculars and turns to his aide. "Signal the convoy. Maintain formation and speed. We'll reach Leh by nightfall." The aide bows and hurries to the radio room. Neither man notices the faint drone already building in the southern sky. Neither can imagine that this peaceful morning represents the last moments of an entire strategic doctrine about to be shattered like glass against stone. The weight of certainty, confidence for the Imperial Japanese Navy was not mere bravado. It was institutional memory forged in victory. Since the stunning triumph at Tsushima in 1905, where Admiral Togo annihilated the Russian fleet, every Japanese naval officer had been raised on the twin pillars of spiritual superiority and tactical precision. Pearl Harbor had only reinforced this belief. The Americans, caught sleeping on a Sunday morning, had seemed to validate every assumption about Western weakness and Eastern resolve. Captain Tsuji Morigi of the destroyer Asashio embodied this tradition perfectly. Standing on his bridge, watching the convoy maintain its precise formation, he felt the deep satisfaction of a man operating within a perfected system. Each ship held its exact position. Each gap between vessels measured precisely 600 meters, close enough for mutual support, far enough to avoid collision. The destroyer screen wove back and forth in practiced patterns, sonar operators listening for the telltale signature of American submarines. "The Americans fear our destroyers," Morigi told his executive officer. "That's why they hide in clouds, dropping bombs like cowards. They know that coming close means death." His executive officer, Lieutenant Yamada, nodded agreement. He'd seen it himself off Guadalcanal, B-17s flying at 20,000 feet, their bombs creating impressive waterspouts that endangered nothing but fish. The few times American aircraft had attempted lower altitude attacks, Japanese anti-aircraft fire had torn them apart. The wreckage of a B-26 shot down 2 months ago still decorated a beach near Rabaul, a monument to American foolishness. Below, in the narrow passages between Asashio's guns, teenage sailors drilled with religious intensity. They'd been taught that each gun crew was a single organism, multiple hands guided by one purpose. The loader must anticipate the trainer's needs. The trainer must feel the aircraft's path like a hunter tracking prey. The mount captain must orchestrate this ballet of brass and cordite with perfect timing. When executed properly, their 25mm guns could put up a wall of fire that no pilot would dare penetrate. The convoy's anti-aircraft doctrine was sophisticated and proven. Ships would maintain formation while throwing up overlapping fields of fire. The outer destroyers would engage at maximum range, forcing attackers to jinx and weave. The inner screen would catch any aircraft that penetrated the outer defense. The transports themselves, though less heavily armed, would add their weight to the barrage. Mathematical studies at the Naval War College had proven that an aircraft attempting to attack through such defense had less than a 15% chance of survival. What those studies hadn't considered was an enemy that refused to play by established rules. Admiral Kimura, meanwhile, reviewed the morning's radio traffic in his cabin aboard Shirayuki. Intelligence reports suggested increased American air activity around Port Moresby, but this was normal. The Americans were always buzzing about, accomplishing little. More concerning were reports of submarine contacts along the convoy route, but his destroyers were among the best anti-submarine vessels in the fleet. Their crews had hunted American submarines from the Coral Sea to the Solomons. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. His aide entered with a weather report: scattered clouds at 8,000 feet, visibility unlimited, sea state calm. Perfect conditions for spotting submarines or high-altitude bombers. Kimura nodded approval. The weather itself seemed to favor Japan. On the transport, Kyokusei Maru, Colonel Toshio Nishimura of the 51st Division, conducted his own inspection. His men were in high spirits, despite the crowded conditions below decks. They'd been told that Lae would be their gateway to glory, a chance to push back the American advance in New Guinea. The colonel had fought in China, where Japanese infantry had proven repeatedly that spirit could overcome material disadvantage. He saw no reason why jungle warfare would be different. "The Americans rely on their machines," he told his officers during their morning briefing. "But machines break down in jungle humidity. Machines cannot match the warrior's spirit. We will teach them what infantry can accomplish when guided by proper doctrine." His officers chorused agreement. They'd all heard stories of American softness, how they required ice cream ships and mail delivery, even in combat zones, how they complained about mosquitoes and rain. The Japanese soldier, trained to find strength in hardship, would surely prevail. As the morning progressed, this certainty spread throughout the convoy like a comfortable blanket. Radio operators chatted casually between ships. Cooks prepared lunch with extra rice rations to celebrate the convoy's expected arrival. On the destroyer Tokitsukaze, someone started singing a military march, and soon entire gun crews joined in, their voices carrying across the water. The tragedy of the Bismarck Sea began not with the first bomb or bullet, but with this moment, when absolute confidence met absolute surprise. The Japanese were prepared for the war they expected, armed with weapons and doctrine that had proven successful time and again. They could not conceive that the enemy had spent months reimagining the very nature of air-to-sea combat. At 0800 hours, the convoy's radar operators detected the first contacts, multiple aircraft approaching from the south at approximately 7,000 feet. The contact report rippled through the fleet. "Air raid imminent. Man all guns. Maintain formation." Sailors rushed to battle stations with practiced efficiency. Ammunition lockers flew open. Gun barrels swung skyward. Range finders began tracking the approaching formations. Everything proceeded exactly as doctrine prescribed. The machine was working perfectly. Captain Morigi smiled grimly as he watched his crews prepare. "Let them come," he said. "We'll give them the usual welcome." But even as he spoke, far below the radar's detection angle, a second formation was approaching. 13 Royal Australian Air Force Beaufighters and 12 modified B-25s of the 3rd Attack Group were skimming the ocean at 50 feet. So low, their propeller wash carved temporary valleys in the swells. They were invisible to radar, invisible to lookouts scanning the sky, invisible to every defensive preparation the Japanese had made. The attack would begin in minutes. And when it came, it would arrive not from where doctrine said it should, but from where imagination had placed it, just above the waves, at eye level with the men it had come to kill. Thunder at wave height. The first indication of catastrophe came not as a warning, but as a sound, a deep drumming roar that seemed to rise from the ocean itself. Lookouts who had been scanning the sky instinctively dropped their binoculars to search the horizon. What they saw defied every expectation trained into them through years of service. Aircraft, but not diving from altitude or approaching in neat bomber formations. These planes were so low that spray from their propellers created white trails across the water's surface. They came in loose lines, weaving between wave tops, growing larger with terrifying speed. "Surface level? Aircraft at surface level!" The cry came from multiple ships simultaneously, but it carried the tone of disbelief rather than alarm. Gunners who had elevated their weapons to track the high-altitude formation frantically cranked their barrels downward. But the mechanism weren't designed for this. The depression angle was too severe. Many guns couldn't bear on targets approaching at wave height. Major Edward Larner led the attack in his B-25, nicknamed Ruthless. Through his windscreen, the Japanese convoy spread before him like a model on a tactical table. He could see sailors running on the decks, officers pointing, gun barrels swinging wildly, trying to track his approach. At 280 miles per hour, the distance closed with stunning rapidity. 2,000 yards, 1,500, 1,000. "Steady," he told his co-pilot. "Let them fill the windscreen." At 800 yards, Larner pressed his trigger. The modified B-25 shuddered as 850 caliber machine guns opened fire in unison. The convergence point had been carefully calculated. All 8 streams of fire would meet at exactly 600 yards, creating a cone of destruction nothing could survive. The sound was indescribable. Not the rat-tat-tat of movie machine guns, but a continuous roar like ripping sailcloth amplified 1,000 times. Tracers reached out from Ruthless's nose, appearing to connect the aircraft to its target with solid bars of light. Each gun fired 800 rounds per minute. In the 3 seconds of Larner's first burst, nearly 400 half-inch bullets slammed into the destroyer Shirayuki. The effect on the ship was catastrophic. The bridge windows exploded inward in a shower of glass and steel fragments. The helmsman was cut in half at the waist. The navigator simply ceased to exist, replaced by a red mist. Captain Kimura, who had been standing near the chart table, was thrown backward as bullets punched through the bulkhead beside him, showering him with splinters. Gun positions 1 and 2 fell silent instantly, their crews swept away by the concentrated fire. A 25mm ammunition-ready box detonated, sending a pillar of flame skyward. The ship's radio antenna was cut like wheat, falling across the deck in a tangle of wire. But Larner wasn't finished. As Ruthless roared over Shirayuki at mast height, the bombardier released 2 500-pound bombs fitted with delayed fuses. They struck the water 50 feet from the ship and skipped like stones, once, twice, before slamming into the destroyer's hull just above the waterline. Twin explosions lifted Shirayuki bodily from the water. The blast wave was visible as a ring of compressed air racing outward. When the destroyer crashed back down, her back was broken. She immediately began settling by the bow, tons of seawater pouring through holes the size of automobiles. Behind Larner, 11 more B-25s followed in loose trail, each pilot picking targets with cold precision. The air filled with converging tracers, skip bombs, and the continuous thunder of massed machine guns. To the Japanese sailors, it seemed as if the very air had turned solid with metal. Lieutenant John Hennebree, in Hell's Fire, banked sharply toward the transport Teiyo Maru. Through his gun sight, he could see anti-aircraft crews frantically trying to depress their guns far enough to engage. They were still cranking when his bullets arrived. The gun crews vanished in sparks and ricochets. Hennebree held his trigger down for 6 seconds, an eternity in aerial combat. Nearly 800 bullets raked Teiyo Maru from stem to stern. The transport's wooden deck structures disintegrated. Lifeboats exploded into splinters. Ventilator cowlings were sheared off at deck level. Men caught in the open simply disappeared, reduced to component parts by the incredible kinetic energy of the 50 caliber rounds. Then came Hennebrie's bombs. They skipped perfectly, one striking amidships, the other near the stern. Teo Maru lurched as if struck by a giant's fist. Her cargo of ammunition began cooking off in the heat, sending rockets of flame through her hull. Within minutes, she was listing heavily, her crew abandoning ship into an ocean that was itself on fire from spreading fuel oil. The Australian bowfighters attacked from a different angle, their 4 20mm cannons and 6 machine guns adding to the havoc. Flight Sergeant Les Coulston dove on the destroyer Arashio at 0 altitude, so low he could see the expressions on sailors' faces in the instant before his guns erased them. His cannon shells, explosive rounds the size of cigars, punched through Arashio's bridge structure like it was cardboard. The destroyer tried to turn, to present a smaller target, but this only exposed her length to the next attacker. Flying Officer Jack Doyle raked her from bow to stern, his cannon shells detonating among the torpedo tubes. One torpedo's warhead exploded, tearing a 40-foot section out of Arashio's hull. She rolled onto her beam ends and sank in less than 2 minutes, taking 180 men with her. The Japanese were shooting back, but their fire was wild, uncoordinated. Gunners trained to track predictable targets at altitude couldn't adjust to aircraft that appeared and vanished in seconds. Some guns couldn't depress enough. Others were masked by their own ship's superstructure. Those that could bear were often silenced by incoming fire before they could get a bead on their attackers. Captain Tsuji Morigi on Osashio watched his perfectly ordered universe dissolve into chaos. Ships were burning, exploding, colliding as they tried to evade. The formation he'd taken such pride in had become a death trap, vessels so close together that one ship's destruction endangered its neighbors. He screamed orders, trying to organize some kind of defense, but his voice was lost in the bedlam of explosions and machine gun fire. A B-25 appeared off his starboard bow, growing larger with horrifying speed. Morigi could see the flames dancing in its nose as 8 guns fired continuously. He threw himself flat as tracers walked across Osashio's bridge, chewing through steel and flesh with equal ease. When he raised his head, half his bridge crew was dead or dying, and his ship was on fire. Hell unleashed. What followed in the next 10 minutes defied every concept of naval warfare the Japanese had developed over decades. This wasn't battle. It was systematic destruction delivered at point-blank range by an enemy that had reimagined the very nature of combat. The convoy's formation, so perfect in its geometry, became a shooting gallery. Ships trying to evade collided with neighbors. Others, maintaining station as doctrine demanded, simply provided stable targets. The transport Oigawa Maru attempted to turn hard to starboard, only to slam into the burning Teo Maru. Locked together, both ships provided a massive target that 3 B-25s attacked simultaneously. Commander Kimura, bloodied but alive aboard the dying Shirayuki, tried desperately to coordinate a response. But his radio room was destroyed. His signal flags burned away. He could only watch as his convoy disappeared piece by piece. Through the smoke, he saw Kyokusei Maru take multiple skip bomb hits. Her hull split like overripe fruit, spilling men and cargo into the burning sea. The Americans showed no mercy and expected none. This wasn't about chivalry or honor. It was about annihilation. Pilots made multiple passes, returning to strafe survivors in the water. Their orders were explicit. Nothing that could reinforce Leh was to survive. For them, this wasn't cruelty, but mathematics. Every Japanese soldier who died here was one less their comrades would face in New Guinea's jungles. The destroyer Tokitsukaze tried to shield the transports, placing herself between the attackers and the cargo ships. Her captain, Commander Yasuhide Doi, ordered every gun to fire continuously, trying to create a curtain of steel the Americans couldn't penetrate. For a moment, it seemed to work. The amount of fire going up was impressive. Tracers creating a deadly lattice in the air, but the B-25s had a crucial advantage. They were faster than anything the Japanese had faced at low level. At 280 miles per hour, they crossed the convoy's defensive envelope in seconds. By the time gunners adjusted their aim, the aircraft were already past, leaving destruction in their wake. Flying Officer Tom McBride of the RAAF brought his Beaufighter in from the east, where the rising sun blinded the Japanese lookouts. He opened fire at maximum range, walking his cannon shells across the transport Ayo Maru. The explosive rounds found the ship's fuel bunkers. The resulting fireball rose 300 feet into the air, mushrooming into an oily black cloud that could be seen 20 miles away. Men jumped from Ayo Maru's deck, some already on fire. They hit the water only to find it, too, was burning. Oil from ruptured bunkers spread across the surface, ignited by flaming debris. Sailors had to choose between drowning and burning. Many chose neither, clinging to wreckage in patches of clear water, hoping for rescue that would never come. The B-25, piloted by Lieutenant James Dunn, made its run on the largest remaining transport, Nojima. Dunn held his course steady despite tracers flashing past his cockpit. His navigator later recalled counting the seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, drop. The bombs skipped perfectly, one striking below the waterline, the other penetrating the deck before exploding in the troop compartments. The effect was horrific. Hundreds of soldiers of the 51st Division had been packed into those lower holds like sardines. The explosion turned the confined space into a charnel house. Those not killed instantly were trapped as seawater rushed in through the massive hole in the hull. Their screams could be heard even over the sound of battle, a high, thin wailing that survivors would never forget. On Asashio, Captain Morigi was trying to save his ship. Half his bridge crew was dead. Fires raged fore and aft. The steering gear was damaged, causing the destroyer to circle helplessly. He ordered counterflooding to correct a growing list, but the men he sent below never returned. The passages were already flooding. A bullfighter appeared off his beam, so low its propeller wash raised spray from the ocean. Morigi watched, almost mesmerized, as the aircraft's cannons began firing. The shells marched across the water toward him like deadly footsteps. He had time for one last thought, that warfare had changed beyond recognition. Before the shells found Asashio's magazine, the explosion was visible from every ship in the convoy. Asashio simply disappeared, replaced by a column of fire and smoke that rose 1,000 feet into the sky. When the smoke cleared, only debris remained. Of her crew of 200, just 18 survived, most badly burned. By now, the convoy had lost all cohesion. Ships scattered in every direction, each captain trying to save his own vessel. This only made them easier targets. The Americans split into hunting pairs, methodically tracking down and destroying each ship. The transport Taime Maru tried to beach herself on a nearby reef, hoping to save at least some of her cargo and troops. But B-25 pilot Captain Victor Tettleman spotted the attempt. His skip bomb struck just as Taime Maru reached shallow water. The explosion broke her in half. The bow section grounded on the reef, while the stern slipped back into deep water, taking 800 men with it. Colonel Nishimura, who had spoken so confidently about warrior spirit that morning, found himself trapped in Kyokusei Maru's tilting corridors. Emergency lighting had failed, leaving only darkness punctuated by the red glow of fires above. Water rose steadily, carrying the bodies of his men. The colonel who had promised to teach Americans about infantry warfare died without ever seeing his enemy's face, drowned in fuel oil and seawater. Radio operator Petty Officer Kenji Yamamoto, one of the few survivors from the transport Kembu Maru, later described the scene below decks. It was like being inside a drum while giants beat it with hammers. Every hit shook the entire ship. Men were thrown against bulkheads. The lights went out. Water started coming in from everywhere. We could hear the Americans' engines getting closer, then the hammering would start again. Men were crying, praying, screaming. Some tried to break through the hatches with their rifles, but it was no use. The ship was already listing too far. Yamamoto survived only because a skip bomb blew open the hull near his station, allowing him to swim out through the hole. He emerged into a scene from hell. The sea was on fire. Ships were burning, exploding, sinking all around him. Men thrashed in the water, some trying to swim, others already dead. The air stank of cordite, fuel oil, and burning flesh. Above this inferno, the Americans continued their work with mechanical precision. They had ammunition left and targets still afloat. The attacks would continue until one or the other was exhausted. The ocean burns. By the time the first wave of attackers exhausted their ammunition and turned for home, the Bismarck Sea had been transformed into a vision of apocalypse, where 8 proud transports and 8 sleek destroyers had sailed in formation just 15 minutes earlier. Now only 4 crippled ships remained afloat, and these were burning. The sea itself seemed to have caught fire. Oil from ruptured bunkers spread in an ever-widening slick, ignited by flaming debris. The water reflected orange and black, punctuated by the white foam of explosions still erupting from dying ships. Columns of smoke rose thousands of feet into the air, merging into a dark pall that blocked out the sun. But the agony of the Bismarck convoy was far from over. As the first wave of attackers disappeared southward, their engines fading into the distance, survivors in the water began to hope. Perhaps the Americans were satisfied. Perhaps rescue would come. Then they heard it again, that deep drumming roar of aircraft engines. A second wave was approaching. Fresh pilots with full ammunition loads, following the pillar of smoke that marked their target like a beacon. On the destroyer Yukikaze, one of the few ships still capable of movement, The executive officer turned to his captain. "They're coming back," he said, his voice hollow with disbelief. The captain, Commander Kagawa, nodded slowly. His ship had survived the first attack through pure luck. The Americans had concentrated on the transports, but Yukikaze's luck was running out. Half her anti-aircraft guns were unmanned, their crews sent to fight fires. She was down by the bow from near misses that had opened seams in her hull. Her speed was reduced to 12 knots. "Signal any ship that can receive," Kagawa ordered. "Scatter and proceed independently to Rabaul." But most ships couldn't receive. Their radio rooms were destroyed, their antennas down. And scattering was easier ordered than done when you were on fire, flooding, and surrounded by enemy aircraft. The second wave attacked with the same ferocity as the first. B-24 Liberators joined the assault, adding their bomb loads to the carnage. They focused on the surviving transports, ensuring that not a single soldier would reach Lai. The transport Shinai Maru had survived the first attack with relatively minor damage. Her captain had hoped they might escape. That hope died when 4 B-25s converged on her simultaneously. The ship's doctor, Lieutenant Hayashi, was treating wounded on deck when the attackers arrived. He later testified, "I saw them coming, so low I could see the pilots' faces. There was no expression there, no anger, no hatred, just concentration. They opened fire at the same moment. The deck exploded around me. Men I was treating simply vanished. I was thrown against a bulkhead and knocked unconscious. When I woke, I was in the water. The ship was gone, just gone. Where 2,000 men had been, there was only debris and bodies." The destroyer Shikinami tried a desperate tactic. Her captain ordered full speed and radical evasive maneuvers, hoping to throw off the attackers' aim. The ship carved wild S-turns through the water, her remaining guns firing continuously. For a moment, it seemed to work. B-25s passed overhead, their bombs missing. Then a bullfighter attacked from dead astern, where Shikinami's guns couldn't bear. 4 20mm cannon and 6 machine guns concentrated on her stern, walking forward along her length. The rudder was shot away. The propellers were damaged. Speed dropped to nothing. Shikinami became a sitting duck. The next B-25 didn't miss. Skip bombs struck her amidships, and the destroyer rolled over and sank in minutes, forming a massive whirlpool that sucked down swimmers trying to escape. As the slaughter continued, something remarkable happened aboard the few surviving ships. Discipline, that foundation of Japanese naval service, began to crack. On the transport Oigawa Maru, soldiers trapped below decks panicked completely. They fought each other to reach the ladders, trampling the weak. Officers trying to maintain order were ignored or pushed aside. One officer, Lieutenant Tanaka, tried to organize an orderly evacuation. He stood at the base of a ladder, sword drawn, trying to regulate the flow of men. A soldier, wild with fear, shot him and climbed over his body. The thin veneer of Bushido gave way to the animal terror of men about to die. Meanwhile, individual acts of heroism flashed like sparks in the darkness. On the sinking destroyer, Arashio, Petty Officer Nakamura, refused to leave his gun mount even as the ship listed past 45 degrees. He continued firing at attacking aircraft until the sea swept him away. Aboard Kembu Maru, an army sergeant named Sato organized a human chain to pass wounded men up from the flooding troop compartments. He saved 17 men before the ship suddenly lurched and sank, taking Sato and dozens of others still below with her. These acts of courage meant nothing to the arithmetic of destruction. The Americans had come to kill ships and men, and they did so with industrial efficiency. By 1500 hours, it was over. The last attackers turned south, leaving behind a scene that defied description. Where the convoy had been, only a vast field of debris remained. Oil fires still burned in patches. The water was carpeted with wreckage, broken masts, overturned lifeboats, crates, bodies, and pieces of bodies. The few men still alive clung to whatever floated, calling weakly for help that wouldn't come for hours. 4 destroyers had survived, all damaged. They moved slowly through the debris field, pulling survivors from the oil-slicked water. What they recovered barely looked human, men so covered in oil they were black from head to toe, many with horrible burns, all in shock. Commander Kimura was pulled from the water by the destroyer Uranami. He had survived the sinking of Shirayuki by pure chance, blown clear when her magazine exploded. For hours he had floated among the dead, watching his convoy disappear ship by ship. When they dragged him aboard Uranami, he said only one thing: "The war is lost." Silence and reckoning. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, an unnatural quiet settled over the Bismarck Sea. The thunder of engines and guns had been replaced by the soft hiss of waves against debris, and the occasional muffled explosion as another ship's magazine cooked off beneath the surface. The water, once pristine blue, had turned a dark brownish black from oil and ash. Smoke still rose from patches of burning fuel, creating pillars that leaned with the wind like mourning figures. The destroyer Uranami moved through this floating graveyard with engines barely turning, her crew leaning over the rails with boat hooks and lines. They pulled men from the water mechanically, without words. Many survivors were so covered in oil they had to be identified by their identity discs. Others were beyond help, terribly burned men who died within minutes of being brought aboard, their last words often delirious calls for mothers or wives who would never know exactly how they died. Surgeon Lieutenant Yoshida worked without rest in Uranami's cramped medical bay. The floor was slippery with blood and oil. He had run out of morphine in the first hour, then bandages, then hope. Men lay in corridors waiting for treatment that might never come. The worst cases, men with massive burns covering most of their bodies, were quietly moved to a separate area. Everyone understood what this meant, though no one spoke of it. On the bridge, the destroyer's captain read the list of confirmed losses with growing horror. Shirayuki, sunk. Arashio, sunk. Tokitsukaze, sunk. Asashio, sunk. All 4 destroyers gone. Of the transports, not a single one remained afloat. Kyokusei Maru, Ayo Maru, Teiyo Maru, Kembu Maru, Nojima, Oigawa Maru, Shinai Maru, Taimei Maru, all resting on the seafloor or scattered across it in pieces. The numbers were staggering. Of 6,900 soldiers of the 51st Division, fewer than 1,200 had been pulled from the water. Many of these would die from their injuries over the coming days. The convoy's naval personnel had fared no better. Entire crews had gone down with their ships. trapped below decks or killed by the devastating strafing attacks. As darkness fell, the surviving destroyers turned north toward Rabaul. They ran without lights, expecting American submarines to finish what the aircraft had started. Behind them, they left a sea that would bear the marks of battle for days, oil slicks spreading for miles, debris washing up on distant shores, bodies that would never be recovered. Commander Kimura sat wrapped in a blanket on Uranami's deck, staring at nothing. His uniform had been cut away by medics. His left arm was bandaged from shoulder to wrist. But his physical wounds were nothing compared to the crushing weight of realization that sat on his chest like a stone. He had witnessed not just the destruction of his convoy, but the death of everything he'd believed about naval warfare. The Americans hadn't fought with honor or tradition. They had fought with innovation and mathematics, turning their aircraft into flying gun platforms that attacked from angles no one had imagined. They had killed efficiently, systematically, completely. When his aide tried to offer him tea, Kimura waved it away. "How do we report this?" he asked quietly. The aide had no answer. "How did you explain that 8 warships and 8 transports had been destroyed in less than an hour? How did you tell Tokyo that the sea lanes they considered secure were now death traps? How did you admit that American mechanics in jungle workshops had outsmarted the entire Imperial Navy's tactical doctrine?"